What is up, everybody? This is episode 10 of MX Unfiltered. And yeah, it's like the off season, somewhat preseason for a lot of guys. Arena Cross has already started 2024, but we're all waiting for Supercross to start. And as always, I've got Coach with me. And then we've got a special guest by the name of Anthony Rodriguez. He just got done with some of the World Supercross stuff. And today we're going to talk a little bit about training, off-season training. Is there anything that these guys actually can they recover? What do they do? Because they're racing 40 weeks out of the year. How are you supposed to recover and then build a base again and get back into racing? And this will help guys that if you are a weekend warrior, there's some of the stuff that you could possibly learn from as well. So here we go. What's up, Coach? What's up, Anthony?
Good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
Thanks for
And
putting another
I
show
kind of
together,
screwed
man.
up Anthony because I was like, hey, we're doing a live show. And he thought it was Monday because, you know, Hopper, I have a way of misrepresenting stuff at times. Call it a curse. That's just something. So, Anthony, I appreciate you logging in, brother.
Thank you. Yeah, it was super last minute, but I'm glad we made it work, and it should be entertaining for sure.
Yeah, it looks like you got your hair done and, you know, you put on a shirt, man. You look good.
Yeah. I mean, like I was telling you guys earlier, I'm in the middle of moving into a new property, a little closer to the track, so it'll be easier for training. But yeah, I was in between carrying boxes, and then I realized I had to do this, so I kind of just use my hand as a comb, and here we are.
Yeah,
Well,
so
it's
there might
all
be some painters or something. We'll probably have to let A-Rod go here pretty soon. But you're saying training facility. Where are you actually training at?
So I'm back to MTF. I grew up there since I was 13 years old in 2009. I spent most of my time there. Obviously, whenever I had to go to MXGP and different teams, I spent my time overseas. But mostly, I've just been based at MTF. It feels like home. The people there treat me very well, and then training is really good as well. So I figure after spending a lot of time in California and realizing that it does have some positive, but it also has a lot of negatives being out there, I thought the best move I could do was to come back to my roots and get a better base going for me.
Awesome, man. Well, there at MTF, do you have a riding coach and then like a nutritionist, or how does your program look?
So I mostly train with little Brian Johnson. He used to be a really fast pro rider. Most of you may or may not know. And then also Colleen Millsaps. She's not so involved in the professional group as much as she used to be in the track side of things, but she still comes in and sees what we're doing and gives us her input. And then the gym program, I'm kind of doing it on my own. With as many injuries as I've gotten in the past, I can't jump into a group that's doing lifting and all these things and just jump into a circuit with them because my shoulders may not be as strong as the other kids, and then we have to change weights, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, I'm doing my own fitness program. But if I was doing their program, they would also have nutritional advising, not plans, but advising. Luckily for me, I've been there so many years that I kind of know what works for me. I've done so many different diets throughout my career. Some of them not so good when I thought they were gonna be amazing. Like, that's how it is. You make sacrifices. The diet is super difficult, and you think you're doing what's best for you, and you do it for 6 months, and all of a sudden you realize you were just doing damage to yourself.
Sweet, dude. Well, I guess one of the questions that I have is, do you focus primarily in the off season on like weight training, or are you just riding? And how high is the intensity that you're trying to ride before you get ready for Supercross? And coach, if you want to intervene at all with your thoughts or disagreements on potentially, I mean, this is just a conversation.
Yeah, of course. And maybe I'll learn something from what I say as well.
No,
So
it's
go for it, A-Rod.
yeah, I want A-Rod to answer your question first.
Okay, so with the way my season has been this year, has not been ideal. Um, Literally, this is my off season. It's 4 weeks, and I'm taking this week off, and I'm doing a lot of the moving. But I have not been as consistent as I wanted to. Moving from California to Florida, I packed everything up in my van and I drove it. So I've lost like 2 to 3 weeks of proper training there. And then you go into a new house, you're getting everything organized before you can actually jump into a routine. With that being said, an ideal scenario for me would be right now, I would try to be doing some of the lifting that I'm not going to be able to do during season. And the reason I don't do a lot of lifting during season is because it makes you more prone to injuries. Because, when you do, like, let's say, shoulder lifting or whatever, there's a little swelling that goes on. And with someone that has already had injuries, that little swelling might make it easier for your shoulder to pop out of place if you were to crash. So with my body conditions, I try to stay away from lifting when I'm going riding to riding. Now, if I have, let's say I race on Saturday and I have Sunday and Monday off, I might try and do some lifting on Sunday morning because I'll have Monday to be fully off. Right now, I'm actually doing a lot of intervals as well, cardio intervals, because my base on the zone 2 is kind of decent right now. But the high intensity is kind of breaking me down right now. When I'm doing those supercross sprints, I do 3 to 4 laps and then I just feel gassed out after that. So that's kind of like my weak point right now, and that's what I'm working on.
Coach, do you have anything to add? I just know that you're just itching to say something here.
No, it's not about itching. It's what Anthony is bringing up, I think, is so incredibly valuable because what Anthony is dealing with at a professional level is also kind of his biggest frustration, not only for himself, but for everybody. It takes 6 months to build an aerobic engine. So when you hear Anthony saying he's going 3, 4, 5 laps and he's gassed, that's because he hasn't had what we refer to as a preseason base period. That could be 12 to 16 weeks, where what we're trying to do is maximize strength, maximize aerobic function. Think about it. If you and I've used this illustration publicly before, so I apologize for anyone who's heard it. If I was going to hand you $100 bill and I said, we're going to have a radar gun, and as soon as you hit 100 miles an hour, I'm going to give you, or 60 miles an hour, I'm going to hand you a $100 bill. You have 2 bikes to choose from, a 65 or a 450. There's not one person that wouldn't choose that 450. And I simply just want everybody to answer the question, why? Now, for us, mechanically, it's just common sense, right? A 450 can go faster, easier. And then you look at somebody like Anthony, he's got to build enough of a strength base, that's the size of his piston. He's got to build a big enough aerobic engine, size of his carburetor, and he has to lay what we call a necessary blood vessel bed, which is the avenues of which oxygen and nutrients go into the muscle, and the byproducts are, think about it like a freeway, on-off ramps. The problem with Anthony, as you said it at the beginning of the show, Johnny, he's racing World Supercross. The season didn't even get over till the end of October, beginning of November, or whatever. We know it was a long season. And then go do some World Supercross races, maybe get invited to go to Percy, come back and Bercy. And then next thing you know, where did he get a chance to lay a base? And how many times has Anthony already talked about he's having to deal with the long-term ramifications associated with injuries, which means limited range of motion. If Anthony lifts extremely hard, you heard what he said, he runs the risk of popping a shoulder out of joint. So he doesn't even have time to work on the stabilizer muscles. And I want you to think about like the head of the humerus. We think about the big muscles, the deltoid, the bicep, the tricep, upper traps, levator, scapula. Well, the problem is the head of the humerus has to be kept into the shoulder joint with very, very, very small muscles. So this is where we say with our clients, there's a difference between prehab and rehab. And then for somebody like Anthony, who's been racing how many years have you been professional, Anthony, if you don't mind me asking?
Since 2014, so going on to 10 years.
Didn't you just race the arena cross too?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like sheer sprint going. How was that? Did you feel, because
Honestly, I had never ridden the Yamaha. It was a 250. I jumped on it, and dude, I felt really comfortable. I made my life super hard because I didn't know how the qualifying system worked. Long story short, I ended up going to the LCQ and everything. So I did the most amount of laps anyone did. And surprisingly, I felt really comfortable and fit. Like, it was one of the races of the year where I finally was like, okay, all this sacrifices are paying off right now, and I'm getting to where I need to be.
Well, in Johnny, the thing that you got to keep in mind based on what A-Rod is saying there is to lay that aerobic foundation and build that strength base. That's the time of the season that we really just don't have anymore. And it makes it very difficult for these guys. And again, I don't want to convolute the conversation, but I hope that we can create enough perspective. We're talking to an athlete who's been pro for almost 10 years. So this is what we said, Johnny, a couple weeks on your show when we were talking about the idea that when I work with young athletes that are on 85s, uh, our number one goal is to try to make sure that they build durability. And it's interesting because a lot of the moto dads think that the only way you can go fast is to always go fast. And nothing could be further from the truth. You can't go
That's how
fast.
I grew up. I don't know
Yeah.
about you,
Well, I would say
Anthony.
99% of our listeners grew up the same way. I'm 55 years old, as I always tease. So in 85, 86 in the gym, what was the mantra? No pain, no gain. Pain is weakness leaving the body. Sleep when you're dead. Whatever these mantras were that were bounced around. And we persevered through them until we couldn't persevere anymore. Now, what's interesting is, and I say this very, very respectfully, the problem that I run into in maybe not a problem, but where my frustration lies is you've got these ex-pros that are now trying to take on the role of a physiologist, as we've talked about numerous times on the show. I just have a problem with that because where where's the accountability of, and I'm going to kind of reiterate what A-Rod said, he puts his career in the hands of somebody for 6 months only to find out, and he said it in his own words, it actually was detrimental. He can't get that 6 months back. Now, I think he should personally get his money back. I think there should be some level of accountability. The problem is now that trainer has smoked A-Rod, A-Rod has to go fix it, try to rebuild it, try to get back to where he was. Where's the accountability factor? And
Uh,
it's not about me being like Mr. Good Guy, but that's the way we run our business. If I
no,
ever
you're
ruin,
100% right. But the one thing I want to clarify is, unfortunately, that didn't even come from a trainer. That came from a team manager. I'm not gonna mention what team because they were doing it. I was thinking they were helping me. But let's say it's a very, very successful 250 team, and they believed I was too heavy for the 250, so I was 185 at the time. And they were comparing me to another rider, which they should not have whatsoever. Again, I was also really young, so I was kind of intimidated by this hierarchy, or however you say it, like the higher ups. And so I wasn't going to argue to someone that had won championships to say, I don't think this is going to work. And I actually believed them, trust them, they have won championships. And what they were making me do was lose the weight by going gluten free, dairy free. And I did drop the weight. I did look amazing in the mirror, like, but I wasn't trying to be looking good. I was trying to be a good rider. With that being said, my speed was great, everything was great, but my body would just crash at 20 minutes into an outdoor moto. So you were 100% right on everything you said. I just wanted to point out that it wasn't a trainer, but it was my superiors at a team that made me go after that diet.
and that's certainly justified, A-Rod. The thing that I find interesting, and again, we're not asking you to call anybody out, but if you look at a lot of the team managers, what are they? They're ex-professionals that grew up under the tutelage of an ex-professional that grew up underneath an ex-professional. And that's the problem that I have with people who are doing things that they don't have the credentials to do so. Now, again, I'm not tooting my own horn. What I'm saying, and I've said this publicly, and I've said it on the show previous many times, I've had several 250s, but I should never be hired as a professional mechanic to spin wrenches for anybody, much less a factory team. And that's the problem that I run into is where has that line been drawn where we, and I'm going to sound like a goody two shoes here, and I don't mean for it, but where do we draw the line on the ethics and where do we draw a line on the morality of, we have heard people publicly say, I don't care if I smoke the individual as a racer, I'm going to get a championship at all costs.
Yes, true.
And we see athletes go through a program and they last one, maybe 2 seasons, and they literally go off into the sunset. And it hasn't happened once. It hasn't happened twice. It hasn't happened 5 times. It's happened over 10 times that I could give you specific names on. And the problem that I have with it is twofold. If I was putting a tremendous amount of money into a team, which has a group of riders, if somebody who's out here in left field smokes A-Rod. I've got all this tremendous trust and confidence in A-Rod. There's no accountability to the person that's telling you to go gluten-free, dairy-free, red meat-free, whatever all these frees have to be. And Johnny, we've talked about this on the show. What did they say to John? What did they say to A-Rod? We got to cut weight, right? I've said this publicly on this show. We got to cut weight. We got to cut weight. You got to get the whole shot. You're on the 250. You got to cut weight.
Well, I mean, I kind of agree a little bit, like being 190 pounds on a 250, you're going to be limited. But if your body composition is just, there's no way
My fat at the
to,
time was 7%, even though I weighed that much.
see, like that's got to
So
be a
there's
good,
that.
yeah, you know, like that's like me trying to jump up to 180. I would be smoked because my natural weight is right around 150. So it's completely two different spectrums. You can't put it all into every individual has to be around this certain weight. Like truthfully, A-Rod, if I'm outside looking in, your body composition is best for 450s. And I think that's why you're racing 450 this next year.
Johnny, think about this. And I don't mind saying this publicly on your show. I've been working with a couple of investors about building a professional race team. We've talked about this off the record, right?
Yeah.
We're going to build a team around the health and the wellness and the foundation of the athlete, and then build the team around that. Because if you listen to what A-Rod said, right? And A-Rod, I say this very respectfully. This isn't a dig on you. It's just the way that the industry treats you. A-Rod gets thrown into a program where now he becomes a cog in the system. He's not A-Rod. He's a disposable entity. He's a greyhound dog. We're going to run him until we spit him out, and then we'll just replace him with somebody else. Can you imagine if A-Rod, if I said to A-Rod here publicly, hey, A-Rod, here's your salary. It's 150 grand a year. You don't have to
Coach,
worry about.
I understand. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I think we're going down a rabbit hole here. I think he learned from the scenario as far as that didn't work for him. So now he's changing it, and maybe it's just a lack of a little bit of fitness education when it comes to most teams. And what I want to try to focus on, at least with this, is we've got a guy like my saying, experience is best when it's not your own. You know, so A-Rod has learned, hey, this gluten and dairy free didn't work for him. I want to know what has worked for him, and then have you help us kind of gel the two, especially for riders that are up and coming. You know, how would they start off, and how would they keep themselves from burning themselves out? So A-Rod, if let's say you had the perfect scenario, as far as you could have as much time to prepare for a Supercross race or your season, what would it look like, and how would you go about it?
Well,
From
luckily for
stuff you've
me,
learned.
I've lived that perfect scenario as well. And the industry, jumping back into that briefly, is very different in MXGP in Europe. They look at you not as a disposable rider that they can replace. They look at you as an investment, and they want you to be better. So they invest this money in professional health people, in biochemists, and trainers, in everything. You become their little project, and they'll be extremely happy if they grab a rider that's outside the top 10 and becomes a top 5 guy. They take pride on that. And they did do that with me when I was in Factory Yamaha MXGP. I went out there. First round, I got 18th. A few months later, my best moto was a 4th. And that's all thanks to their program. And that was the perfect program for me. You know, the races don't happen weekend to weekend. So you have a little bit more of a break in between races every now and then, where you can build more base, you know, do your 3 hour zone 2 bike rides, compare it and mix it with intervals and whatnot. The other thing I want to point out is it is a evolving, changing game. For me, for example, I've had this healthy diet the last 3 years that has been working amazingly with me. Nothing out of the norm. Like, I can eat anything and everything. I just watch my carb portions after 6 p.m. and then I try to keep it healthy, you know? It's just as simple as that. And that's what's always worked for me. But now all of a sudden, I've been feeling gassy. I'm always bloated, and I haven't changed anything. So, you know, I asked to my trainer Filippo at Speed Lab what's going on, and it goes back to what Rob said. You know, he's a professional and he's accountable. He's not gonna just give me advice. He's like, maybe try this or maybe do that. He's like, well, we need to see a GI for this. Like, let's talking to another professional that can exactly attack this issue, and we can fix it right away. There's no time for us to test things because you're being gassy. Let's maybe stop eating beans when that might not be E. So we're just going directly to a GI, and we're gonna get checked and ask or learn why is it that this diet that has worked for me when I was in Brazil and I was winning title is now making me gassy and bloated the whole time.
And this is something that I think, even though A-Rod said it so subtly, it is amazing when you go from country to country to country. What worked in Brazil may not work here because the way our food is grown, the way it's cultivated, the way it's packaged, the way it's sold. We saw this when we were in Costa Rica. Literally, the food that comes directly out of the water, literally, when you say or hear somebody say from farm to plate, they live it. I mean, every component of their food is completely different than what we got here. And not to be disrespectful or gross at all, but you can see it in the way that you feel, the way that your energy levels are, your bowel movements, the consistency of them, the timing of them, the number of them. It's a difference of literally night and day. And this is why when you see a lot of guys, I thought it was interesting when Prado was talking on Gypsy Tales, when he was talking about how he would literally travel with his own food, whether it be
Yeah,
water or
especially to
something.
Indonesia.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another component, like you're saying, A-Rod. What worked literally in Brazil doesn't work in California, may work in Florida, possibly won't work in Texas. And that willingness to be open-minded to it and not just say, well, two challenges. One, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and try to go back to ground zero. And also, nobody's saying that what you're doing is wrong. It's about finding what needs to be adjusted. And I think that's another problem that we run into our industry is we have a lot of people that say, don't argue with me, don't doubt me, don't question me, which
Oh,
I think is quite interesting because as we talked about it before we went on, with myself working with Nick Laurie and a little bit that you and I have spoken before today, whenever somebody's asking a question, I feel like you, the athlete, deserves the respect and you need to be educated on what is going on, not just, well, that's my job, don't question it. You're not questioning it. You're asking to become more educated because really what it boils down to is when you put your helmet on, A-Rod, I want you to be so confident that you know that you're prepared to go do battle. And whatever that confidence comes from, whether it's in your sports strength, whether it's in the way you're sleeping, your heart rate numbers, we don't really care. And that's not about these athletes like yourself at a professional level. It's not that we're coddling you. I mean, can you imagine if Tomac or Sexton or anybody else pulled up to the factory rig and there were food items that were underneath the tent that we know Tomac and Sexton don't like, but they're like, suck it up, Buttercup, we're going to eat it.
yeah.
And yet
It probably
any of
wouldn't
our
happen.
any of our listeners, they go, well, I'm being a pansy, right? I don't like this. I need this to perform well. No, you're setting yourself up. You're creating an environment of success over and over again, whether
Well,
that's with
A-Rod,
food or
from
sleep.
your experience with MXGP and them treating you a little bit more like an investment, do you think that the whole industry here in America, if they started learning from that experience, like would your training be better if you had that same level of resources to get ready for this year's Supercross?
100%. And I don't think it's just the teams. I think it's the racing culture as a whole. When you race amateurs here in Gold Cups, Winter Ams, Minios, I don't know how it is nowadays. I hear they're doing longer motos, but you have little 65 kids sprinting for 4 laps, and that's what their race is. Where in Europe, they race 15 to 20 minutes, so you're already building that base. You're preparing them for war in a sense. Where here is all about that intensity, and that's why little kids are getting injured or overdoing it themselves. And then in Europe, you also have the EMX class. So instead of having like the schoolboys in US, they have the EMX, and you're a 16-year-old racing 30-minute motos at the same track that the MXGP people do. So the whole culture is just like, let's prepare yourself so that when you get to the pro racing, you have a shot of being a podium guy. Not just let's prepare yourself so that this weekend you can win the 4 lap race.
A-Rod, is there as many classes? Because I haven't been over to Europe because they're doing longer motos. Do they still have as many classes? Like I feel here in America, there is so many classes. Like it's impossible for guys to do longer than 4-lap motos because there's just not that much time in a day. Even locally at a lot of just your local tracks, sometimes motos get cut from 4 laps to 3 laps because the sun has gone down because they're having 29 motos in a day.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna try to answer this as correctly as possible, but I didn't race amateur in Europe. I did do local races while I was there. and they were very organized, and it did not seem like that many classes. They don't have 6 different bet classes over there, that's for sure. They might have just one bet class and 150 class. And that's just me answering this question by what I remember would a race day look like on a regular weekend, but I don't have all the facts because I didn't race amateur myself over there. But the race days on those local days definitely did not seem as hectic or as many classes as the one here. I mean, you have Loretta Lynn's, I think it has like 54 to 56 classes. So it definitely is not like that.
Gotcha. This is something that just I would like to know as far as you getting ready for Supercross prep. Have you been doing mainly when you're on the bike and off the bike? Are you making sure you're staying in zone 2 and leaving some of the sprints for zone 3? And are you trying to limit your exposure to like high intensity so that you can be ready for the prolonged 17 race Supercross series, or how does your intensity and volume look like?
So when I'm on the bike, there's no controlling what's on my in, right? Although my trainer has hinted at the idea of maybe getting an outdoor bike so that I can do some 30-minute motos at a lower intensity zone. That's a ideology he has, and I trust him as a trainer, so I think it would be good, but I haven't done it. So when I'm on the bike, all I do is comfortable longer motos and then some sprints here and there to keep that high intensity. When I'm on the bike rides, I definitely do a little bit of everything. I have my days where it's just zone 2 for the longest time and then finish it with the zone 1 even. And then I have my intervals where I go as hard as possible for 30 seconds standing on a bicycle. So I leave that up to him. He does explain a lot to me why we do things, but my brain's already full with a lot of other stuff, so I don't remember every single detail he says about why I do things, but he does explain it to me for sure.
Gotcha.
And
Coach, do you have anything to add to
well,
that? Because
I think the biggest key is the variety. And we always say when we're working, particularly with professionals, and then when you get to the vet rider, what's so incredibly important is, and this is going to sound like we're going a completely different direction, but be patient with me. Before we, let's say that we're working with A-Rod as a professional, we do the exact same analysis as we do with our vet riders, and that is, what is the stress of the athlete prior to coming into the week and then each individual day? Because at the end of the week, the body can only handle, think about a cup of coffee. The cup can only hold so much. And then at that point, you tip into overtraining, exhaustion, mental and physical burnout. So what we do is we look at the stress. And Johnny, you and I were just talking about this earlier today. We have to look at the stress of the athlete coming in to dictate what is it that he or she can take on today and cumulatively over a week. Now, that sounds like a lot. That's our job as an analytics company. But stop and think about it. Anybody, thanks to Google, can go and find workouts, but that doesn't mean that the body should be submitted to them, whether it's a long, easy tempo aerobic base or whether it's doing on off intervals to work on anaerobic threshold. The bigger question needs to be, what is the state of the human body from a preparation standpoint? If we look at how religious we are with our hour meter, we look at our hour meter on the bike and we make judgment calls based on that. You wouldn't take a bike with 100 hours, hand it off to A-Rod and say, okay, go race the arena cross tonight. Good luck. He would be very uncomfortable with the reliability of that. And I want the athletes, anybody who's watching and listening, think about it the same way. Your program needs to be based on variety. But before you can go looking at the variety, you've got to look at the state of the athlete. If you're going through a divorce, bankruptcy, and changing a new job, probably shouldn't be doing much sprint work. You shouldn't be doing heavy lifting in the gym. Why? Because you're a motor that's got a lot of hours on it and you're already on the verge of blowing up to begin with.
see,
So
that's crazy to me, though. It goes against all the ideology of racing. Sorry, Coach, I'm interrupting you, but it's guys that race dirt bikes. They're lack of a better term, they're not pussies. So I feel like
mhm.
even with broken wrists and whatever, they're going to just go out and just hammer down. There is no stopping and quitting and trying to treat yourself like a temple. But everything that you say is always like, treat yourself like this temple. No paper cuts, no nothing. You got to perform on race day, and it just
But we're not talking about paper cuts. What we're talking about is if we get inside the human chest, right? You've got the cardiac input, output, you've got adrenals. Your adrenals are the only thing in your system, theoretically speaking, that allows you to adapt to stress. So think about it this way, because you bring up a very good point, Johnny. Why do we see such a short career life for most athletes in our sport? If they're at the very, very top of the pinnacle, right? A-Rod said that he got a chance to be underneath the tutelage of somebody that had all the championship background, but it wasn't a sustainable program. That's not me talking. That's A-Rod who lived it, experienced it, and fortunately was able to come bounce back from it. Now, hold on to your thread of thought for a moment. How does an elite marathoner who runs literally 75 to 100 miles a week, how can they have a career that goes sometimes 10 to 15 years, 2 or 3 rounds of the Olympics, racing at the highest level? And by no means am I saying that a runner puts him or herself through the same amount that A-Rod does. That's not what I'm insinuating. But if you go off a sheer volume, 100 miles of running a week, and that's broken up into base running, hill running, and speed work,
yeah, it's
complemented
like
with strength training and
30 plus
flexibility.
hours a week training.
30 to 40 hours on your feet. So if you look at A-Rod, how many hours a week do you train Supercross on your hour meter, Monday through Friday?
I'd say close to 6.
So let's put 6 hours on the hour meter on the bike,
Dude, that's a lot of time on a bike too. On a Supercross track, that's a lot of laps.
and that's a lot of
Well,
laps.
it's hard to counter, right? Because I'm going off of how many hours I do, but with motor brakes and sometimes the engine's running and you're just doing starts. But that's how much I put on the bike. Now, on the track, it's probably less than that, like doing actual laps and hitting jumps and whoops.
So let's cut that in half just for the sake of number. Johnny cut it down by 25%. Let's say 4 to 5 hours on the motorcycle a week, and let's just say 10 hours of cross training. So now we're looking at 15 hours a week, and you've got a marathoner, or Johnny, you're doing triathlons right now. Look at these top guys like Jan Frodeno, and look at
That's all they do is train. It's crazy
but
how
my
much time they
point
spend.
is, Jan Frodeno has been through 3 rounds of the Olympics at the very top of the game, from Olympic distance all the way up to and including Ironman. Okay. And the idea here is he's still racing at 43 years old. And this is why it comes back, Johnny. I am not coddling A-Rod. I'm not coddling anybody with his type of raw ass talent. But what we do have to recognize is he's a human being that rides a motor, right? So what ends up happening is we have a tendency to disassociate that, and we go, well, he's strong, he's very, very good on a motorcycle, so we're just going to keep training him, and we're going to keep pushing him, and we're going to keep riding, and then we look at the attrition rate of our sport, and that goes back to what you're saying. I'm not saying a paper cut. And
So, Coach, if I'm fast forwarding to the synopsis of where you're getting to, are you saying that some of the elite marathoners, they're training a lot, but they're only racing 5-6 times a year, where in motocross and supercross you're potentially 33 races a year with some other on top? Is that where you're alluding to? Is you're like it's too much maximum effort type training stuff? Or
100%, but let's go ahead and get away from running, because our listeners could give two shits about running. Let's go back to the MXGP series. How many months does that race series last, A-Rod? Is that 5, 6 months, I think it is, of racing, total racing?
Yeah, I think it might be 7, but they're spread out. They're not weekend to weekend. They're not like back to back. You might race 2 weekends in a row and then 2 weeks off, and then race a weekend and then a weekend off. That's where it's different. But it's very spread out.
So, Johnny, that's where I think it comes back more importantly to your question. The physiological terminology is called periodization. It's taking a 12-month window and saying, how many weeks are we going to do preseason? How many weeks are we doing pre-competitive? And when does the competitive phase begin? And if possible, you break it down into competitive phase 1, 2, and maybe 3. We've only got 12 months in a year. So if we go back to what we started today's conversation with A-Rod, where does somebody at his high level of capability get a chance to build the base that gets him a chance to be able to carry through all these races?
And one thing I like to mention on that is when I won Loretta Lynn's, I had 6 months of preparation for that one race. and I didn't miss a workout. I did everything I could, and not to be cocky, but when I showed up to Loretta's, I knew in my head, I wasn't walking the pit saying this, but in my head, I knew I was a champion just by stepping one foot in that place. I knew I was going to leave that place with a title because I knew I did everything I had to do in order to be prepared. And with preparation comes confidence. With that being said, I have 3 weeks to get ready for A1. How am I going to line up at A1 with that type of confidence? It's a whole different scenario, right? So
Yep.
I think that's the point you're trying to make on the preseason and the offseason and all these different things. And not only that, but at what point do you get to go to the beach with your wife or your significant other or your kid, even if you have one? And that's where I wanted to go also into this scenario where there are teams out there that have 5 riders all doing the same program. They all have to show up in the morning at the same time and ride together. Well, let's make a scenario where every one of them has a wife and a kid, right? And they all have the same talent and physiques, right? Their fitness is at the same exact same. So we have 5 clones. They're all the same. Well, one of them is going through a divorce and is not sleeping enough. But then he wakes up and has to show up at 8 a.m. and do exactly the same thing as the other because the trainer is not taking that into accountability. That's where also injuries can come from, added stress, and that's the kind of things that can shorten your career as well.
And that's the frustrating part, is the shortening of the career. Johnny, you and I talk about this off the record all the time. Fatigue-related diseases are avoidable, plain and simple, end of conversation. Whether you want to call that Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue, Addison's disease, whatever it may be. And that's where my biggest frustration lies in our sport, is when you look at how many people have to tap out of our sport because of fatigue-related diseases, which comes back full circle. When you're under the tutelage of somebody who's uneducated, you're underneath the tutelage of somebody who doesn't really care about you as an investment, you're just a pawn in a cog in a system, we can't act really surprised that we are in the situation that we're in, whether that's high turnover, high injury rate. We
Well,
joked about it
the
this year,
biggest
the attrition rate from Supercross to outdoors. Go ahead, boss.
sorry, coach. The
No.
biggest example of recovering correctly is the whole 180 that Ken Roxon did. We knew he was fast, but he needed to do his things his own way, and he ended up honestly almost racing even more, but yet he still was riding less than what he's been underneath a factory team, where potentially that's exactly what A-Rod is talking about, is he was expected, boom, boom, boom. This is what you have to do all the time. There's no break. And A-Rod, after a certain amount of time, you might just get to the point where you're like, man, I need to take a break. I don't want to get up and I don't want to start riding. I don't want to train. So there's going to be less effort involved. And it's just going to be like knocking you down and down and down and down. And I've talked so much about this, this is why you saw guys just do Supercross only. And that's why they were always like, look at Jeremy McGrath. That's why he's the king of Supercross, is he was able to take the entire summer off and recover, heal from the injuries. Because honestly, the injuries are the thing that take the longest time. Is you can't really start training a base if you're still injured, recovering from all the racing. And what did we see in Supercross last year? Is you saw top 20 guys, everyone have miss a round or something because they were so injured. And then the motocross season, there was hardly any factory guys around. So gosh, I bet there's probably going to be a lot of guys that end up starting the season injured too. So A-Rod, as far as injuries go, is there still anything lingering for you? And I know that's kind of, you said your shoulders, but are you feeling as healthy as you can on the bike? Maybe not fitness wise, but as strong as you're going to be to maintain injury prevention.
So, yes, I feel like even though I'm 28 right now, this is one of the best moments in my physiques. My body is probably at its best in the last 8-year period. And that's because I gave myself time to heal and do the proper things I needed. The racing in Brazil that I did for 3 years, you would only race 7 outdoors a year and 3 arena crosses. So I actually had time to recover and work on it, not just recover only by sitting around, but what Coach Rob was saying earlier, I strengthened all of those small muscles around my shoulders, my knees, and everything. And one thing I did that really did help me was in 2021 in December, I went in and I removed a hernia that I had in my lower back. I fixed both of the meniscus on my both knees, and I also fixed my ulnar nerve in both elbows. So it was kind of like, I know I have 3 months to recover. Let's do this now so that my body gets to where it needs to be, to the proper recovery and the proper training. Where if you're in the US and you have all those injuries that I just mentioned that needed to get fixed, but then you have a 6-figure contract that you won't get unless you line up in A1 in the next 3 months, the rider will line up like that with that herniated disc in the back, with the meniscus lingering. Where I was lucky that I did those 3 seasons in Brazil, and it gave me the time to do what I just say I did. I really worked on my entire body, and now I'm the best I've been in those last 8 years. I did hurt my shoulder at the arena cross race. Nothing that I'm worried about though, and I'm giving it time to heal. That's why this week I didn't ride at all. And Monday, Tuesday come, I'll see how it is. If it feels like it's anything but normal at 100%, I won't ride, and that's the beautiful thing of the deal I've got going on for myself and the contract I have and the people that I'm working with is my health comes first, because I have had races where I go 3 months without racing and I just get on the bike twice and my body's 100% where it needs to be when it comes to cycling and lifting and all that. All I didn't do was riding, and all of a sudden I kill it. I do really good. And that's one of the other things I did in Europe that was completely against my theory, my way of thinking is we did this thing called super compensating, which I know you guys are aware of. But literally, I would go 15 days without training or racing from one round to the other. And the team's telling me, nope, you don't ride, you don't do anything. And I'm like, can I do bike rides? Nope, unless you're under zone 2. And then I would show up to the races on Saturday and I'd be like, well, is this going to work? I'm a little worried. But then obviously MXGP, you have 2-day races and you have 2 30-minute practices on Saturday. Long story short, that's when I got my best results. That's when I was getting top fives in the MXGP class. Oh, sorry, the 250 class in the MXGP series. And it was the times where I was going 15 days without training.
And Johnny, that goes back to what we were saying earlier.
crazy.
We're not treating them with paper cuts, right? Stop and think. Take what A-Rod just said, and I want to kind of deviate away from Roxon because we heard Astafin say that there might be some juju juice behind the scenes. There's no drug testing. That's what's allowing him to race at a level now and a frequency that he wasn't able to do at Honda. So I want to move away from Roxon for that reason, and I want to go to Tomac. What do we know about Tomac every year when the season is over? 9 out of 10 people would say he grabs his bow and arrow, goes with his dad, and goes where? Goes elk hunting. You don't see him at Bercy. You don't see him at appearance races. Correct me if I'm wrong, or somebody in the chat room can correct me. Has Tomac ever done an exhibition race when the season's over since he's turned pro? I don't think he has. I may be wrong.
Only last year, the WSX one he did.
Okay. And so
No, he did that from the get-go, coach. Like I'm a Colorado boy and so is Tomac. And so like I did all of the local series and it was all chasing these RMXA, SRAC championships, racing all the time. And he would show up for like just the state championship race and he would own everybody. And
but it goes
it just
back to what A-Rod
baffled me.
is saying, though. It goes back to what A-Rod is saying. He has been able to set his business program up around the idea that he makes enough money during the year with win bonuses and salaries that when the season's over, he's gone. Like, we don't hear about him. He doesn't pop up. He's not big on social media. He's out doing the super compensation, almost like A-Rod was saying, like he gets off the grid. Sure, he might mountain bike a little bit here and there, but I'll guarantee you that he gets away from structure for 3 to 4, maybe even 6 weeks. But every single year we hear about him going hunting, and he comes back and his batteries are charged and he's just gotten better year. If we think about his incremental progress since when he was at Geico, it's just gets a little bit better every year. And it goes back to what A-Rod is saying. He's got his professional contract set up where he does get a chance to regroup. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how many of these contracts, Johnny, you were talking about McGrath being the first one going to Supercross only. And then, we noticed James went that route and it's starting to become a trend. not really a trend. I mean, it's become some people's contracts. I mean, how many years did Brayton do Supercross only? You know, and it just at some point, it's like something's got to give. A-Rod even alluded to it himself. There are contracts that if you don't get on that gate, you're not getting you're not getting that salary. So when somebody gets a little bit snide and they're like, why in the world would A-Rod ride knowing that he's got, a meniscus issue? Because if he doesn't gear up, he
He's
doesn't
got
get paid.
bills.
He's got bills. He doesn't get paid. And there's a stipulation in the contract. If you don't do X amount of races, you lose certain percentage of your salary, or you don't get a salary at all.
And
So
it goes back to what said the money thing. Like, I'm doing all these races. It's not because I love racing. Yes, I do love racing, but I also would love to have my time to recover, maybe do everything the proper way. But the way my career has been, I do need these little races to pay for everything that I have to pay. And believe it or not, if I had a dream scenario, the the career that I get to choose and do, it would probably be MXGP. Because look at Kid Rowley. Kid Rowley was so successful for so many years. I think he won MXGP races at age of 37. And why is that? Because he lived in Rome. He had an actual regular human being life aside from being an athlete. Where in the US, the one that's doing that properly is Eli Tomac that we know of. There might be a few other, but then again, Eli Tomac has made millions for years now, so he can give himself the luxury of being able to create his contract in the way that he gets to live the way he does get to live. But you have all these people from Europe coming over to America, and they're doing that because yes, people get paid better here. But if you look at the longevity thing, I would so much rather go back to when I was 18. And if I had the option, hey, you can be a factory rider in US or MXGP, it's your choice. I would have totally gone there. And don't get me wrong, I love living in the US. This is my hometown. I know this place better than I know Venezuela. So if we take dirt bikes aside, I stay in the US. But if you put dirt bikes in the picture, I go race MXGP.
well, but
Dude,
think about this, Johnny. I've heard a little bit of rumblings behind the scene that Deegan is not going back to Goat Farm.
that's interesting.
So think about this, right?
And
It goes right.
Brian,
Go ahead. Excuse me.
he's a very sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No,
He's very
I think
smart. He's
we're
not going to let his kid get pushed into the sand. And I know we've talked quite a bit about, again, just the overtraining when it comes to that stuff. And gosh, what I was trying to allude to, A-Rod, with you did World Supercross. Do you think that there is a possibility with a series like that to race 6, maybe 10 times a year and make enough money to where that was all you did, where you raced every couple weekends and that would be like the Supercross of MXGP? Because that's really what they're trying to do. Do you think that that's a possibility and that would be another dream scenario as far as a gig goes? Or how was
Yeah,
your
that's
experience
totally
with?
something that would be very appealing. Right now, only doing those races is not something that's enough for me or much of the riders to make a living. But if he becomes that, that would be awesome. And there is enough talent in this world for to have those three series without affecting each other. World Supercross does things really good. There are some things that they still have flaws, but they're really close to making it happen properly and put that scenario that we're talking about. And the other thing that's I shouldn't be saying because I'm a writer, right? But the public in these places, they don't really care if I'm 2 seconds lower than Tomac and I'm winning. What they really care over there is that there is racing going on. So let's say that I'm Anthony Rodriguez and I'm winning and the guy getting second is Kate Clayton or vice versa. He's winning, I'm getting second, but we're giving them a good show. That's what they care for, right? And if you look at it from the entertainment point of view, that doesn't take away any value from us compared to Tomac and Roxon. Yes, they're faster riders, so the street cred is going to go towards them for sure. We all know AMA right now is at a way superior level, but there is space for all those three championships to be there in full motion with riders making money enough of it to have a career and live off of it without affecting each other. So I think that it could become that scenario, but it's not there quite yet. At least not for the riders that are outside of the top five.
and Johnny, you and I have talked about this numerous times. This is why if you take what A-Rod just said and you start to bring his personality out and the media starts to, and this is where YouTube and social media has helped these athletes create their own persona, which creates their own marketability. And now stop and think about that. Here you've got a professional racer that's saying, look, 3 series can all coexist, no problem whatsoever. And I do agree with Rob B in the chat room. A-Rod, you said it yourself. People want to see racing. Whoever that ends up being about and who it's against, we want to see bar-to-bar racing. We definitely do. But when we don't know about the riders that are out there, and you're shaking your head or you're looking, hey, who's that number 72 that's out there? And this is, Johnny, where we've talked about where Netflix has done a great job with Formula One, where we've started to become familiar with Formula One because of something that brought the personalities of the team owners, the mechanics, the drivers.
It's all the
And
drama, right?
exactly. And it
Yeah.
goes what A-Rod is saying. You can have 3 series coexist, but you've got to know the players and you got to know the drama and the stories. We want to know that A-Rod went in and over a 3-month period had to recover from 2 elbows, 2 meniscus, and a hernia in his lower back. You don't think that makes for good? How the hell did he do that? You see him getting rolled into surgery, and you see him coming off of his pain meds, and you see him having to try to do rehab, and you're like, fuck, this dude's been through hell and back. You now are a fan. You're like, this guy is a beast. Well, now we got to see some of the drama that he went through, and then he's racing against the clock, and he's like, all right, I got to get ready for that first round, whether it's WSX or MXGPs or whatever. But now we have a person that we can resonate with. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's not number 72. Oh, that's A-Rod, or that's Cade Claysom, or that's Carnow, or whoever it may be, right? All of a sudden now, and this is what we've talked about. Do I believe that it's our in the sport media's responsibility to create personalities? Well, yes and no. We all know about the top guys. Well, where did that come from? Media. It didn't come from Netflix. It didn't come from any other format. Well, now we almost have to look to an additional format platform to be able to bring the personalities of people in. That's the only way that I think with what A-Rod is saying, will it ever materialize? Because I think Arena Cross has done a great job. What's it called, Johnny? Motivate, where you can throw money on somebody that you really like. And
Yeah, they're getting the whole back into, I don't know if most of the viewers probably remember this, is where you'd have some guy walking around the stadium going, hey, donate for the winner of this 1v1 race, and they would get a bunch of cash together, and then whoever won. I mean, talking with the owners of Arena Cross currently, they're all older riders. They would say sometimes that pot would get to $5,000 or so, but now because of gambling laws, you've got to do it a certain way depending upon what state you're in with their jurisdiction or their sports committee. So the Motivate is been hard to get around all that stuff, but it's very good. And truthfully, I know we're talking a lot about change here, but I believe that the sport here in America is on the precipice of change because of what the entire world is doing. And MXGP is not changing because it works for them. And what A-Rod says makes a lot of sense as to why you've got guys like Hurlings and a lot of guys that just want to, Caroli, that are going, nope, I'm not going to race over here in America because it's too much. I like my time. I like being a human. I like going to the beach with my wife and kids.
It's a balance that A-Rod said.
But because
Well,
of
going back to that Formula One thing, sorry I interrupt.
Nope, go for it.
It helps so much. I'm a fan myself because of that series. I didn't watch it before because of that series. My girlfriend doesn't really love racing, and then now she's got a favorite. And this person does not win races, but she recognizes the personality and she sees something in him that's kind of like her, so she roots for that guy. And in motocross, we're not doing it. Not even with the best rider in the world, which is probably Eli Tomac. We know he's coming back from Achilles. Have you seen any videos of him doing the recovery, or how heartbreaking that night must have been when he lost the title? Zero, nothing. So they're not even doing it with the top athlete. But imagine how much the sport would gain if you would see the heartbreaking moment of how much this guy has worked for and lost it to something that wasn't even a mistake. And not only that, but then you see his recovery, how much work he's putting into it. And then at A1, if he loses to Jet Lawrence, you're still going to be rooting for him because you understand what he's been through, how hard it has been. And if he beats him, you'll be surprised. How in the world did he do it after this nightmare he's just coming out of? So as an industry, if they're not doing that for him, that has all of the people following it, then you're going to ask yourself, well, how they're going to do it with A-Rod or Cake Plays? And I mean, yet Lawrence is doing great with marketing and media. But again, do you see any of the training he does? Do you see any of the effort he puts into it? You hear about it a little bit on his years in Europe, which, by the way, a lot of respect to his family for all the sacrifices and everything they went through to get to where they are. But you don't see the sweats and tears and the blood they go through right now during training. Imagine how much more the sport would benefit from that. I get it. They don't want to show how they train. They don't want to show their adversity or what their weak points are. But hey, these things only get aired
there
after
you
the
go. You hit
season.
it.
After the season's over, it doesn't get aired beforehand. So why are we not doing it? I mean, I don't have the resources to do it, but there's something to it for sure.
Johnny, think about what A-Rod just said. We have talked, and A-Rod just referenced it again. How do we know about the sacrifices that the Lawrence family went through? Because of them going and being on Whiskey Throttle and being so transparent and literally sharing. If that's not the most simplest example of what A-Rod just said, we would have never known until they were given a platform to actually sit and talk about it for 3 hours and have their dad come on at the end of the show and give his 2 cents worth. And that was not a documentary. That was just 4 guys sitting
why
on a
is Hayden
podcast.
Vegan so popular, right? It's because
everything's on YouTube.
What
Yeah, and I love the vegan
A-Rod
thing,
said.
but again, you don't see the adversity. You don't see any of the negative things. You kind of just see everything is butterflies and beautiful, right?
Yeah.
You got a really good point there too. And
Yep.
we like to see adversity in people because truthfully, as far as the 40-man gate on motocross in 22, the most entertaining guy might be the guy in 19th or 25th, where you're like, man, this guy just needs a break because of them covering him. And that's what I love so much about Driven to Survive, I think is what it's called on Netflix,
Yep.
is they literally, every episode is based
Everybody has a
upon,
different scenario.
it's a different
Every
team.
example is different.
Yeah. And here's the guy that's in last place and he's worried about having a job next year. And then you might have the guy on the first premier team. He's worried about losing his job to somebody else because he's got the top spot. Like there's just so much examples of real life scenarios that's not just on the track there. But what I do like what Formula One does is they limit the track time that these guys can test and blah, 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 as they're trying to make it a little bit more competitive. And what A-Rod alluded to is this sport is very resistant to change. Nobody wants to show their progress and they don't want to show their secret sauce per se. And I think that's why a lot of the times that Eli Tomac doesn't post anything or show anything is he doesn't want to let anyone know what he's doing to be competitive. And that goes back to like the Carmichael days when everyone was riding away from each other as they didn't want to share any information with them. And now with the Millsaps training facility where you are at, A-Rod, and all these other places, it's kind of hard not to share. But at the same time, like you're leveling yourself up and your game up with riding with guys that are comparable to you.
Yeah, but going back to one of the things that I don't understand is like the training part. When you air it on TV, you're not telling them I'm doing this for this long or I'm doing that for this. Like you're not telling them exactly what you're doing. And it would still be entertaining without giving much away. And at the end of the day, we all kind of know what you have to do to be at that level, right? So within our community, we kind of know, like, let's be real. We've seen the books. We know, we've seen the logs. I have friends in this team. I have friends in that team. And they don't race in my class. They race in a different class. So they'll tell me exactly what they're doing. But what I think the media needs is imagine if you could have your ears on that first doctor's appointment that Tomac had when he got the Achilles checked. I mean, the drama that could build on a show would be like the doctor telling you, dude, this is serious. We don't know if you're going to be able to race again. You might have to go to China and do this kind of therapy or whatever. That's the kind of thing that I think is going to draw more attention to the sport. And I'm sorry if I didn't answer your exact question the way you probably wanted it to be answered, but those are my thoughts.
You're spot on.
100%. The same thing with Roxon. How much more fans would Roxon have right now, and how much more would the sport love him for coming back, not only winning on a Suzuki, But after what he went through with his arms,
And
right? There was
Phil did do a really good job of explaining what he went through. You know, those clips of his hand getting wrapped up in webs by the recovery. They actually did kill it with that. I mean, maybe if we had a lot more of that, it would help as well. But props to them because they did do emphasis on that recovery.
okay. I
and,
missed it
and
there.
not being negative, but just let's run with what A-Rod just said. We did have Kenny was in GQ magazine. We know Kenny has done fragrance companies and hair shampoos and body lotions and all this other stuff. Can you imagine if they had a little bit more in depth, like Netflix? And then when that article hit in GQ, and then people are like, "Oh, wait, that's that good-looking guy that we saw in GQ," and it would kind of close that loop, which would ultimately drive people more. It, I think create some level of excitement. Where wait, I saw the guy in GQ, and wow, now here's these pictures, and now all of a sudden here's this documentary, whether it's Netflix or whatever, of him going through rehab and then having to get all that junk cleaned out of it, and then it got infected, and then he had to go back in again, and then it didn't heal properly. He had to go back in again. And then finally, you've got some soccer mama 3 that saw him in GQ, watches the Netflix, and then she probably wants to come to the races and probably try to get to meet this guy who's overcome all the odds. Talking about trying to grow the sport organically, that'd be to A-Rod's point, it'd been a very easy thing to be able to sell, if we may use that word loosely.
Yeah, but who's gonna sell it to Netflix or something? Because they've got just such a big platform. Whatever they decide to put on there.
You know who's going to sell it, Johnny? It's going to be Lucas Myrtle. That's who will sell the damn thing. The guy can sell ice to a snowman. I mean, he's a genius. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is, you know, if you follow Lucas on his social media, the guy's in an airplane 23 hours a day. I mean, he's never, ever sitting still, whether it's going to New York and trying to do, different types of product deals, or whether it's clothing deals. I still go back to, I mean, when was the last time you saw any professional racer being able to have a display set up at Gibson Guitars because the race came to town? Stop and think about how powerful that is. Just
Yeah,
simply just use the
normally it's
Gibson
just like a
guitar.
Red Bull cooler in the
And
gas station.
one thing also I see is Formula One was a much bigger sport than motocross is before this series. We do have to accept that. But
Mhm.
this Netflix series, I think, triplicated it. Like, it just took it, skyrocketed it. And I think Supercross, motocross as a sport should realize the potential in this. And I think what frustrates the three of us is that we know the potential is there. We know that if people got to see not only Tomac's story, but my story in depth and everybody's story, people would get hooked in this sport. And I think that's the most frustrating part of it because we know the potential is right there. But I think Supercross should just give Netflix the rights for free because they're going to benefit at the end of the day. Like, let Netflix do the whole thing. Let them make the money out of the series, out of the Netflix series, right? And they're doing us a favor. It's gonna triplicate the sport for the next of however. So I think the selling point is just getting them to understand the potential that this sport has. Because if any film industry or series industry sees the potential, if they come see me train one time, if they come see me recover from surgery one time, they'll be like, okay, yeah, we can make a series out of this. Maybe we won't make money on season one, but there'll be 5 seasons of it because this is entertaining.
Yeah,
I
because it's
totally agree.
so risky, so risky.
And you
Well,
have
and think
so many
about,
stories. Formula One, you have 20 guys that you can make content of. In
yep.
motocross, you have way more. And not only that, next year you have the rookie coming up. You can make so many headlines on that.
That was exactly what I was going to say, Anthony. We weren't even talking about Deegan at a professional level just 2 years ago. Last year at Loretta's in August, he was racing at Loretta's. And then 2 years later, not even 1 year later, he almost won the 250 championship. So, like you're talking about, in regards to that ability to have a consistent funnel of content, it's always going to be there. Who's the next big thing that legitimately makes it? The big one right now for us would be Beaumare, right? He's essentially on that fast track, identical to what Ryan Dungey did, out of the B class straight to a pro class. We haven't seen this since Dungey with what they're doing at KTM with Beaumare.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a story, like Anthony just said.
Well, A-Rod, we're right around the area that I said that we were going to end the show. So I would like to get your last thoughts on if you were an amateur and you were looking at trying to go pro, you've done it from the Brazilian to MXGP to Loretta to Supercross, Arena Cross. You've pretty much done it all. What would you tell somebody, and how would your training look like if you were just, a weekend warrior, a kid that is wanting to go pro, using your expertise? What would you do?
So I think the two most important things go together, and that's patience and consistency, right? Going back to what I said, the confidence I got going into that year at Loreto is that's what you want on your kid to have. You don't want to be rushing through the ranks or rushing through the process. Myself in Venezuela, like my dad could have made me stay in classes to win championships, but he was always moving me up and always challenging myself with faster, better riders. But hey, the following year, I was challenging someone that was older, but I was way faster than the guy I couldn't beat the year before because now I've set up my standards to be higher. But we all did that patiently, right? Don't worry about getting that factory right when you're in 65 or 85s. Worry about it when you're getting to the B classes because I know how important it is. Not everybody has the deep pockets to go race your first year at a supercross fully privately. So I know how stressful and how much of a motivation that's going to be. Oh, we need to try and get that right out of the amateur ranks because we're not going to be able to afford racing professionally. But that's where issues happen as well. That's where you get into trouble if you're just rushing it too hard. So be patient and be consistent, whether that's a 3-day a week training program you've got going on, or a 4-day program, or a 1 day a weekend because that's all you can afford. I remember when I was a little kid, it was every Tuesday, right after class. My dad would pick me up with lunch. I go riding, and it was the same every Tuesday, every Thursday, every Saturday. Those were my training days. Right after school, lunch on the way in the car, and we go training. And surprisingly, I was 8, 7, 9 years old, and my dad didn't know much about the sport, but he had a pitboard and he had a stopwatch. We would do 30-minute motos. At the time, I thought he was crazy, but now I thank him because that base that's how I got built so well. And that's why after a full year of not racing and just being a regular salesman at a regular job, I still jumped back into dirt bikes. And I always had a base when it comes to fitness. And that's because of how I grew up and what I've made my body become. So patient and what was the word I'm looking for? A routine is very important.
Hey, well, A-Rod, I've never spoken with you before this podcast, so I'm a huge fan, man. And you're always welcome to come back on the podcast. And I've got the link in the description. Go support this guy. Wish him the best of luck. And are you racing the full Supercross series? And then are you going to do motocross, or how can we follow you?
So what I've got in the works, obviously I don't want to say it because I don't want to jinx it. It's not fully inked up in paper and signed, but I'm trying to get this 450 deal where I would be doing Supercross and motocross and qualifying to SMX, hopefully. And that's my A plan. If that doesn't work out, then I'm pursuing this B plan, and that one would only be AMA Supercross, also on the 450 though.
Good stuff.
Perfect. Well, we look to see you kick some ass.
Absolutely.
A1.
Thank you both for the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining, brother.
And hopefully you get your house painted or your room painted here.
Yeah.
And then Coach, his link is in the description. I know some of you guys in the chat have already joined his program. He's been helping me out a bunch. I know he could help you out. You just got to have the ability to just give him your scenario and he will make a program built for you, and you need to follow it. So thanks, guys.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
Till next time.
Yep.
Till next time. Thank you.
WFO. Awesome.